Mrs. Morris and the Ghost. Chapter 6. Hands in her jacket pockets, tote over her shoulder, Charlene crossed her driveway when a vehicle revved on the road behind her. A guy, maybe 30, with a dark beard and turquoise blue eyes, pulled up beside her in his dented green pickup. He rolled down his window and gave her a half smile that immediately made her smile back. "Hi," he said, removing his baseball cap. "Did you just move in? I'm Nick Jones." He slowed and parked, then ruffled through some papers in his passenger seat to hand her a flyer. "I'm a painter, indoor and out." Well, after a long dry spell, fate was toying with her today, sending one man into her life after another. Way too young for her, Nick was still very easy on the eyes. She looked toward her faded porch. "Do you have experience? References?" "Yes, ma'am, and I can start right away. I just finished a job over at the wharf. My wages are listed, but for you, I'd give you a 10% discount." "You won't be in business long if you give all the ladies discounts." "Just the pretty ones," he flirted. "Besides, doing a house of this size will look good on my resume." "Tell you what, I'll check your references, and if it pans out, I'll call you for work next Monday. I need a week to see what has to be done." He grinned with confidence. "Call me if you want me sooner." "Thank you, what was your name again?" She pocketed the flyer and held out her hand to shake. "I'm Charlene Morris." Starting a new business herself, she wanted to help a fellow entrepreneur, but only if he had a good work ethic. Her schedule was so tight she couldn't afford to waste time. "Thank you, Mrs. Morris. I look forward to your call." Nick tipped his hat back on his head and backed out of the driveway with a jaunty wave. Guy exuded confidence. She'd give him that. Charlene went inside looking for the silver cat, but he was nowhere to be found. Maybe Jack had gotten him outside? No, he could slide through a wall, but couldn't open a door. She had a lot to learn about ghosts. After their conversation today, Jack had vanished, as if worn out. What could that mean? Was his time on Earth growing short? Did he need to get to his final resting place soon, before his strength disappeared for good? Hanging her jacket on the coat tree by the door, Charlene went to the kitchen and put on hot water for tea. "Jack!" she called, but she could feel that he wasn't there. Where did his spirit go? What did a ghost do all day? She couldn't imagine being trapped for 3 years, unable to leave this place. When Jared had passed, she'd been surrounded by caring family and friends. Jack didn't seem to have anyone mourning him. Pushing that thought aside, she set up her laptop in the kitchen while she steeped a bag of Earl Grey. She looked up the website for the coroner's office. Caleb Watts. Would he give her a copy of the death certificate for Jack? Maybe there was a fee or something she could pay. Deciding to just call, she dialed the number. A man answered on the third ring. "Coroner's office." "May I speak to Caleb Watts?" "Speaking." "Oh, well." Charlene coughed slightly. "My name is Charlene Morris, and I was wondering if I could ask you about Jack Strathmore." "Who?" "Jack Strathmore?" There was a slight pause, as if the man knew the name. "Date of death?" She searched online, wishing Jack was here to ask. 3 years ago?" "What is this about?" His voice deepened with suspicion. "His death certificate is on record." Just like Sam had told her. I understand," Charlene said, "but I was wondering if there was anything you could tell me about his death. Like, why wasn't an autopsy done? The man was in the prime of his life, and a doctor. It seemed unlikely to me that he'd have a stroke and fall down the stairs. Did the fall kill him? Or the stroke? Do you see what I mean?" She heard the sound of keys clicking and imagined the coroner at the computer, hopefully looking up Jack's name. "Jack Strathmore died of a stroke. The contusions on the back of his head were consistent with a fall down several flights of stairs." Jack's lean frame and agility made that hard to imagine. But what if he had just found out about his wife's affair? He said he had a temper. Maybe he'd come home unexpectedly, found Theo and Sean in bed together. Things got heated. The man came at him and pushed Jack down the stairs. Now that she'd believe. I think this is very suspicious. I don't have time for this, lady. Caleb Watts hung up the phone. Rude! Charlene sat back and dropped her phone on the table with a clunk. She took a sip of her tea, pondering what to do next. She had a stubborn streak that her mother said was a mile wide, and she was about to prove it. Jack seemed adamant that he'd been murdered, and yet 2 different sources claimed his death had been unfortunate, but natural. Charlene pushed back from the table and walked to the central staircase, her hands behind her as she studied the dark mahogany stairs. She'd ordered chocolate brown runners to protect the wood. Had there been runners when Jack had died? Would the carpet have protected his head? Unless he'd hit the inches of exposed wood on either side, but that didn't seem probable. Or the hard wooden post? She put her hand to the back of her head, where she'd noticed Jack rubbed on occasion. Habit before his death, or a remnant from the day he'd died? Jack! She felt ridiculous calling into the empty house. No answer. She took the stairs slowly, eyeing the wood for dents or marks, and stopped at the second-floor gallery, her hand on the railing. Looking back down, Charlene put herself in Jack's place, her chest constricting as she imagined a stroke, maybe blacking out, and then falling. But wouldn't you fall forward? Which meant a bump on the forehead made more sense. Would he have fallen head first, or toppled head over feet? She sat on the top step, then turned around and lay flat, as if going down a slide backward. Now she was glad nobody was in the house, as she stretched out on the landing, her head lowered on the step. But if this was how Jack fell, he would have banged the top of his head, not the nape. Charlene looked around from the improbable position and realized that there was no way for Jack to have slid down 2 flights of stairs without getting caught on the landing between floors. She sat up quickly, the blood rushing to her temples, pounding as hard as her heart. Jack! Jack had been murdered. She believed him. But how to prove it? Pulling herself up by the railing, she hurried down the stairs and went back to the kitchen table and a pen and paper. She wrote down, Shauna Strathmore Rawlings. What did she stand to gain? Everything, from what Charlene could tell. Trading pen and paper for the internet, she typed Shauna's name into the search bar and waded through various photos of Jack and Shauna at different events. Charlene didn't trust Shauna's too-perfect smile, or how the camera seemed to love her. The woman even gave frayed jeans an elevated style, as she was caught mid-laugh during a casual oyster bar opening on the wharf. Her hand tucked into Jack's elbow, and in more recent pictures, Theo's. What burned was that Shauna had happily married her lover, while poor Jack's spirit was trapped in this house. Gritting her teeth, Charlene scanned page after page of glorious details about all the good deeds Shauna did for the area, including a community garden. Of course, there was a picture of Shauna holding a bunch of lettuce, surrounded by underprivileged and grateful moms. Where was the real Shauna? Come out, dirty little secrets. Charlene sipped her now cold tea, wondering if she dared call Shauna and ask her point blank if she murdered her husband or had someone do it for her. Then she could sit back and gauge her reaction. It was awfully tempting. Nobody was this perfect. A knock on the front door reverberated through the house. Who could it be? She opened the door and greeted an older man, about 60, trim and fit, dressed for the outdoors in jeans, boots, and a heavy flannel shirt. He wore a knit cap over graying hair and a skeptical expression. Mrs. Morris? Will Johnson. He shook her hand. Ernie paid me to mow the grounds, and if you want me to do the same, then he says you'll have to take over payments. She remembered the strange realtor with a grimace. Ernie sent you? That's fine. The lawns and gardens are lovely. Please, keep on as you have been. Do you only mow and trim? I do the plantings every spring and fall, and prune and fertilize the rose bushes too. He took off his knit cap and strangled it between 2 reddened hands. What else did you need? A handyman, jack-of-all-trades kind of guy. Heard Jack had a hard time holding his form, let alone a hammer. I can help with the lighter stuff and recommend a fella, Parker Murdoch, for bigger projects. He worked on the wine cellar for Dr. Strathmore. She thought of the discrepancy of the craftsmanship, which was the difference between Van Gogh and finger painting. Well, do you know why he didn't finish it? I don't rightly know, ma'am. It seems as if the workmanship was excellent at the start, then finished rather shabbily. She had a growing list of questions for Jack once he reappeared. Will Johnson clammed up quick, not offering an opinion. Could she blame him? She gave him a friendlier smile. Not his fault. He was having a rough day. I also need a housekeeper and cook. Can you recommend anyone? Charlene put her hand on the doorframe as she thought of how much work cleaning 8 bathrooms would take. That would really make my day, Mr. Johnson. The older man finally cracked a smile. Call me Will. And yes, I certainly can. My wife, Minnie, used to help cater parties for the Strathmores before Mr. Strathmore passed. Wonderful! I would love to interview her for a full-time position if you think she'd be interested. What a blessing to have a woman familiar with the house. He shrugged without committing Minnie to anything, which Charlene appreciated. I'll have her call you. Now, I mow once a week during the summer, every 10 days during the fall, and I'll prepare the bushes and gardens for winter. Charlene nodded, then stepped back, appalled at her lack of manners. I'm so sorry, keeping you on the porch like this. Would you like to come in and discuss this over tea or coffee? I said my piece, Will said, stuffing his knit hat in his back pocket. I'll get started then. Thank you. See me when you're done and I'll pay you, and give you my phone number for your wife. Oh, do you happen to know a Nick Jones, a painter? Nope, never heard of him. He turned to the top stair going down. Oh! Will paused and waited for her. Just one last thing. Do you know anyone who might be missing a gray Persian around here? He showed up this morning. Not that I can find him now, but I'm sure his owners must be worried. No, ma'am. Call me Charlene, please. She lifted her hand in grateful wave. And thank you very much. She watched the spry man take the steps 2 at a time, then closed the door with a better feeling than she'd had all day. Thanks to Will, things were starting to fall into place. But where was Jack? And the cat? She'd fully expected Jack to greet her the minute she stepped in the door. And yet he still had not appeared. They needed to devise a plan of action to help her solve the mystery of his death. She couldn't very well just ask every stranger she met. Not if she intended to live in this town without being the crazy lady. Besides that, it was nice for her to have someone to talk to, even if he did float through walls. It wasn't until bedtime, when she was turning off all the lights, that she spotted Jack sitting close to where his Steinway had once been, next to the fireplace in a burgundy chair with ornate gilded carvings. He sat there with a dark blue smoking jacket on and an unlit pipe in his mouth. She almost laughed at the sight, but didn't want to hurt his feelings. Silently, in her padded fluffy slippers, she walked up behind him, bending over to whisper, Jack! Charlene! He acted as if surprised by her appearance, though she highly doubted she could actually sneak up on him. How was your day? You seemed busy enough. Yes, it was packed, and I wanted to tell you all about it. Where have you been? And where is that cat? Did you get him back outside? No. Last I saw Cat was asleep on one of the beds upstairs. Oh no. I hope that doesn't mean I need to have the duvet cleaned. If you do, you might need to do them all. Cat has been trying them all out to see which he likes best. Charlene bit back a groan. The cat had to go. On a different note, she asked, Guess what I discovered today? Did you find out who murdered me? His tone brightened. It won't be that easy, Jack. Charlene came around the chair. According to all sources, your death was not suspicious. Detective Sam Holden said you'd suffered a stroke, and no autopsy was ever done. Jack frowned. You went to the police? Yes, she grinned at his disgruntled expression. And found a detective. Per your request. Remember? I also double-checked with the coroner's office, and Caleb Watts agreed with the detective. It seems as if the abrasions on your skull were consistent with a fall down the stairs. She knelt in front of Jack and looked into his face. I'm so sorry. Is it possible that you're wrong? Not murdered, but an accident? That would be better, right? Do you believe that? He tapped the pipe silently against the armrest of the chair. If so, why haven't I moved on? She lowered her head. Good question. I don't know. Because it didn't happen that way. I would know if I fell. I can't prove it, but I know in my gut that I'm right. Something bad happened. I just don't remember what. Oh, Jack. She wanted so much to help him, but how could she if no one believed her? She needed hard evidence, and after 3 years, it was unlikely that it would surface now. If indeed he was killed, that person would have gotten rid of the evidence. Tell me everything you remember. Jumped out of his chair, the grip on his unlit pipe tight, as he used it to punctuate the air. I don't know. I have a feeling, that's all. Something's not quite right. Jack stuffed the pipe into the pocket of jacket. I get so close to the answer sometimes, and then it slips away. She rose and pulled her list from her back pocket. I believe you, Jack. I want to help. So even though it hurts when I mention your wife, I have to ask. Why wouldn't she demand an autopsy on a 47-year-old man? You are in good health, in your prime. It doesn't make sense to me. What did she gain with your death? His body shimmered and faded. My life insurance policy, my property, my investments. His voice skipped and lowered. Her freedom. Charlene wished she could give the poor man a hug or something, but instead she had to pursue this line of questioning and force him to face what might hurt him the most. Shauna inherited this house, your savings, then turned around and married Theo. How well did you know him? Jack sighed and brought his pipe back out from the recesses of his phantom pocket. Theo and I grew up together in Salem. Our families have been friends for centuries. We bought property together. You did? That's interesting. She tapped a finger across her lip, trying to piece this new information into something bigger. Did you have a falling out? An argument before you suspected about Shauna? No. We believed the property would yield a profitable harvest, and we had time. He shimmered with a wave of emotion, but continued. To invest, as well as money. What did you buy? 100 acres next to Flint wineries. The Flint family gave us each a 10% interest. Jack scowled into the empty fireplace. Charlene wrote Theo on her list. That makes him a suspect. Jack whirled toward her and braced his feet, crossing his arms as he pronounced, I don't think Theo would jeopardize his good standing in the community to murder me. He certainly didn't need the money. He already had my wife. Charlene winced, but kept on with her questions. She'd printed man cave on the sheet of paper in regards to the partially completed wine cellar. Will mentioned that you had hired someone to do that gorgeous woodwork in the basement. Was wine a hobby then, or a business on the side for you? Both, Jack said. Parker Murdoch doesn't look like much, but the man is gifted with the wood saw. I drew up the specs, and he worked downstairs. I'm sorry that it never got finished. Maybe someday she could do it. I heard Shauna and Parker arguing in the basement, he said, his voice hard. Shauna refused to pay Parker to finish the project, told him to buy cheap paneling and cover up his mess, when he considers himself an artist. You can imagine how that went over. Agitated, Jack paced before the fireplace, arms behind his back. She wanted to sell this place. He clamped down on his pipe. I tried to shake the paneling or the boxes to get their attention, but that was right after I died, and I didn't understand how to concentrate my energies. Charlene couldn't imagine the horror of not being seen or heard, only a silent witness. You said Shauna had a poor upbringing? No parents? Foster care? What else can you tell me? Not to sound disparaging, but why is she so visibly active in Salem? Jack bit down on the pipe stem, for the first time showing a chink in his allegiance to Shauna. Salem is an old, old town, and the people in it are overly proud of their heritage. Shauna wanted, maybe even still wants, to be a part of it. Her goal was to be president of the Ladies of Salem, but she was blocked every time she ran. No matter how much cash we donated, or the parties we held, or how much time she volunteered, the old biddies got together and voted her down. Charlene didn't want to feel the pang of compassion for the poor little rich girl, so she buried it, imagining Shauna ordering Theo to kill Jack. You gave her a good life, Charlene said. She enjoyed being married to Dr. Jack Strathmore, he admitted as he returned to the burgundy chair. And I'm sure she's thriving with Theo as well. His family name is older than mine, he said with a dry tone. Charlene ducked her head and tried not to laugh. That troubles me more than a little, and it should bother you too. She marched around the room, too agitated to sit, as she pictured spoiled Shauna not getting what she wanted. Wealth and glamour undoubtedly made her feel important, like she was somebody, not that pathetic foster care waif. Charlene stopped pacing and stood before him. Can I call her, Jack? I need to talk to her in person, get a sense of who she is, what she's capable of. Jack shot out of his chair, his face distorted, eyes dimmed by sadness. No! She couldn't have done such an awful thing! After all I did for her? Good night. Then he was just gone. Charlene slowly retreated to her bedroom and shut her door. It obviously upset Jack when she put the blame on his wife. Shauna might not have done the physical deed, but Charlene bet the woman was in on it somehow. First thing tomorrow, she'd look into Theo Rowlings and find out if he still had the property on the vineyard. Any man willing to cheat on a friend was not someone to be trusted. Ernie, the realtor, would be able to help her. And would there still be boxes of Jack's things in the basement or garage? That night she dreamt of wine bottles and chainsaws. Over the next week, she worked on making Charlene's a home. The carpet runners arrived, and she spent a half-day vacuuming. The plush chocolate material was soft, yet durable, and guaranteed for 30 years. Dusting all of the wood was also time-consuming. Dishes, mopping. She felt like Cinderella. Another day was spent on paperwork for the local business association that had to be filed before she could open. Jack was a no-show, so it was easy to put the whole ghost thing to the back of her mind. She'd skimmed a few articles, and all of them were ridiculous. Something about burning sage to clear the air and pouring salt in the doorways, which she refused to do. How would that look to her customers? The cat wisely stayed out of reach. She crossed 100 things off her to-do list and went to bed each night with a sense of satisfaction. The following Monday morning, Nick arrived in his green pickup truck with a ladder in the back and paint buckets, brushes, and scraping equipment. She called his references, which had been glowing, and hired him to start with the porch. Just white on white, she told the blue-eyed charmer. She didn't want a change of color, but the old stuff had to come off first, and he seemed to know what he was talking about when he pointed out weak areas and wood putty. She was happy to pay him to do it. I'll be inside, so just give a shout if you need anything. Yes, ma'am. Nick pulled a scraper from his toolbox, the metal edge sharp as if brand new. He laid out newspapers around the steps, then kneeled on the grass, then applied the scraper to the buckled paint, sweeping the flakes to the paper. He wouldn't need her for a while. Jack was still gone this morning, and it didn't matter how many times she called his name, he stayed gone. Was he being obstinate, or had he managed to escape the house after all? Jack, where are you? She rubbed the crease between her brow. A perpetual frown mark seemed to lay groundwork there. She felt funny about calling Shauna directly without his consent. Yes, he'd asked her to look into his death, but also told her no more about Shauna. The number for her art gallery was listed online, and she'd looked at it more than once. Theo was the next logical person of interest. Everyone agreed that Jack had a stroke and that he'd fallen down the stairs. So Charlene went back up to the widow's walk and breathed in the invigorating salt-tinged air. Holding onto the railing, she peeked over the edge. It was a long way to the emerald lawn. Where did he have his stroke? Inside the house? On the third-floor gallery? Or the second? It was a hitch in the process that Jack couldn't remember his last few days. She ran her finger over the railing, checking for something to jump out at her. It didn't. But how could it? She had no idea what she expected to find. Had Jack been up here, looking through the telescope? Maybe he'd witnessed Theo pulling up to the house, Shauna running out to the driveway to pull her lover inside. Confirmation of an affair would have brought on anger, rage even, at being duped by your wife and friend. Perhaps Jack's temper had brought on the stroke? Charlene rested her hand on the cool metal of the telescope stand. What if Theo had come into the house determined to confront Jack once and for all, and the two had fought? Could Theo have pushed Jack somehow? Charlene? She turned, hearing a voice call her name. It's me. Down here? She leaned far over the railing where Nick waved up at her. His hat had fallen off, his dark curls loose. I need to pick something up in town, he shouted. I'll be right back. Okay. Charlene stepped back. She'd heard Nick just fine, which meant Jack would have been able to hear a conversation between Theo and his wife. Perhaps she was planning to divorce him? Maybe they'd argued about it, Theo pushing, Shauna having second thoughts. Or maybe she needed to stop spinning tales and get some facts. She smoothed her hand along the golden oak of the staircase banister as she made her way downstairs. Her daily list had items to accomplish for opening day, and yet here she was, wasting time on a ghost who was dead and would remain dead, no matter how one looked at it. Charlene's mind was in a muddle as she returned to the kitchen. She cared enough about Jack's fate to want to know the truth, to help him move forward. If it were Jared stuck someplace, she'd want someone to help him and not leave him in limbo. But she had a strong feeling that her beloved husband was safely in heaven, at peace, watching over her. Had communicating with her been too much for Jack's ethereal system? Perhaps it was the activity around the house or the presence of strangers that kept him away. She placed a call into Ernie with the intention of asking about the land and the vineyard. Since Jack had used Ernie to buy this place, it made sense that he would have used Ernie to buy the land. There was a hefty commission she had managed, and maybe he'd know if Theo still owned it. She left a message and asked him to call her back. When she heard Nick return, she brought him a bottle of water and set it on the porch. Paint scraps looked like snowflakes, no two alike. Wow, it's quite a mess, isn't it? All that old paint had to go. Yep. I ran into town for the sandpaper. My old stuff wasn't up for the job. Once this is smooth, I can start painting. He looked beyond her porch to the open door of the house. This place is huge. I do indoor work too. Luckily, the paint inside has all been done within the last 10 years. I'm good for another 10. He dropped a sandpaper square to the step. You don't get bored with the same old colors? I just moved in, she said with a chuckle. Not bored yet. And with her own ghost? Fat chance. Anyway, I'm back to work. Yell if you need anything. 6 side tables she'd bought had come boxed in pieces she had to assemble. But what a deal. $50, and it was real wood, not laminate. She had her screwdriver and wrench upstairs already. Nick took a long sip of the chilled water and gave her a thumbs up. Sure, I can help if you need anything heavy moved. He flexed his muscles and grinned. Strong and willing. She bet. But she hid her smile in her mug of coffee and didn't respond to his flirting. Thanks. You know of any decent furniture stores in town where I can pick up some good bedroom pieces? I need to furnish a lot of rooms at once. Place called Manzel that's pretty good. There's a few bargain stores around. Depends what you're looking for. Is that spelled with an E or an A? I'll look it up. Oh no, spelling's not my strong point. He removed his cap, wiped his brow, and put it back on his head. She'd noticed the misspelling on his flyer and realized he probably had limited schooling, but it seemed he'd found his niche. Hey, did you know the Strathmores? Who? Jack and Shauna Strathmore. They used to live here. Nope. They must have been old though, huh? Jack and Shauna hadn't even been 50, but that probably seemed ancient to anybody under 30. Charlene laughed and went inside. I'll be upstairs, she said, pointing to the grand central staircase. She paused, catching sight of a fluffy tail disappearing around the third-floor gallery. That cat! She turned to face Nick. I don't suppose you know anyone who is missing a silver Persian? He turned up at the door, and I made the mistake of letting him in. Now he won't leave. Got him out once, but he keeps sneaking back in. She hadn't found any messes, and the milk she'd left out by the cellar door was always gone come morning, which led her to believe that the cat had a way in and out that she hadn't discovered yet. She'd put up notices all around the grocery stores, but so far nobody had called. I'd be happy to check the exterior of the house for you, Mrs. Morris. Call me Charlene, and thank you. I'd appreciate it. Once I'm done here, I'll have a look around. Nick returned to the job at hand. Charlene turned back inside and carried her coffee to the second floor. Minnie Johnson would be over at 2 for an interview, and she hoped the woman would take the job, since she was already familiar with the house. Lost in unpacking, Charlene heard Nick call her name a few hours later. She leaned over the second-floor railing and saw a portly woman in her mid-50s standing below. She was small in stature, probably 5'2" or 3", big-bosomed, with gray curls and a friendly smile. I'm so sorry, Charlene exclaimed, wiping her hands on her jeans. She'd hoped to clean up before the interview, but trusted that the woman would understand. You must be Minnie. She hurried down the stairs and offered her hand. I'm Charlene Morris. Minnie Johnson. You work for Jack Strathmore and his wife Shauna? Charlene headed toward the kitchen. I'm looking for someone to help when necessary right now, but then full-time once we open up next month. Housekeeping and breakfast in the morning if you can manage that. I'm thinking simple, muffins or biscuits, fruit, cereal. On the weekends we could do a big breakfast. Sure. Why don't we sit down and work out details? Minnie's grin showed a side tooth missing. She sat at the kitchen table, her round brown eyes taking in everything at once. This looks real nice. Wouldn't know it's been empty for the past few years. You like it here? Charlene wondered who was interviewing who. I haven't settled in yet, but I love the house. Salem's an interesting city. I haven't had time to take in all the tourist spots yet. Minnie agreed with a single bob of her head. You'll get to it. She retained eye contact with Charlene, which impressed her a lot. I'm honest and I'm fair, she said. I work for $20 an hour. I'm worth every penny. I raised 4 children, 2 dogs, a couple of hamsters, and a grouchy husband. I know my way around a kitchen and how to cater to individual tastes. I'm a good multitasker too. You hire me, you'll be glad you did. Charlene laughed. Can you start today? I certainly can. Well, that's good then. Charlene thought about her mother's concerns and now could tell her mom with confidence that she had nothing to worry about. Charlene had been here a week and already hired a housekeeper, cook, a gardener, a painter, and had a handyman lined up. What she wouldn't share? Sexy Sam Holden, a detective who wanted to show her around town, and a very handsome, charming ghost with a murder to solve. Do you believe in ghosts, Minnie? Charlene kept her tone very light. Her new employee shrugged. Growing up in Salem, a person can't help but hear about the paranormal. I've never seen one myself, so I can't rightly say. Why do you ask? She leaned in and said in a semi-whisper, I suppose you've heard the rumor that this place is haunted? Well, that rumor was started by Ernie Harvey as a ploy, I bet you dollars to donuts, to sell this place. If I'd heard that, I wouldn't have bought the mansion despite the excellent price. Charlene and Minnie laughed together. Can I get you a cup of coffee or tea before we get started? Love one, Minnie said, settling in for a nice chat. Charlene enjoyed conversing with the little woman. She was witty and knew everything and everyone in town. Now, if only she could tell her who killed Jack. As much as she liked her roommate, he was a distraction that she didn't need.